It starts with a number in your head. Maybe it's the amount your parents earned, or the lifestyle you saw on someone's feed, or just a quiet promise you made to yourself years ago. You told yourself that once you reached that number, everything would feel different. But then something strange happens. You reach it. Maybe not all at once. Maybe slowly, over years of work and sacrifice and sleepless nights, and the relief you expected. That deep exhale you've been waiting for, it never comes. Instead, the number changes. It moves further away, like a horizon that recedes with every step forward, and you're left standing in a life that looks successful from the outside, wondering why you still feel like you're falling behind. This is the psychology of never being rich enough. And if you felt it, even once, you already know it's not really about money. It's about something deeper, something older, something that whispers in the quiet moments when you check your account or compare your life to someone else's. It's the feeling that no matter what you have, it will never be sufficient. That safety is always one more paycheck away. That peace is hiding somewhere in the next promotion, the next investment, the next zero added to your net worth. But here's what most people don't understand. This feeling isn't greed. It's not shallowness or materialism or moral failure. It's a psychological pattern, one that has roots in how you learned to feel safe as a child, in how your nervous system interprets security, in how your brain was wired to measure worth. Let me show you what's really happening beneath the surface, because once you see it clearly, once you understand where this hunger comes from, you can finally stop running from a finish line that was never meant to be crossed. You can finally ask yourself the question that changes everything. What am I really searching for? There's a moment that happens when you first taste financial comfort. Maybe you land the job that finally pays enough. Maybe you clear the debt that's been suffocating you for years. Maybe you open your account and see a number that once felt impossible. And for a brief, shimmering instant, you feel it. Relief. Safety. The exhale you've been holding in since childhood. You think to yourself, this is it. This is what I've been working toward. But then, almost immediately, the feeling starts to fade. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet erosion of peace. You notice someone else's house, their car, their vacation photos, and suddenly your achievement feels smaller. The number that once felt like freedom now feels like the baseline. The salary that seemed generous starts to feel just okay, and without even realizing it, you've already moved the goalposts further into the distance. You start calculating again. If I could just get to this next level, if I could just save this much more, if I could just afford that neighborhood, that car, that lifestyle, the mental math becomes constant. A background hum of never quite enough. Where you once worried about paying rent, you now worry about retirement. Where you once feared losing your job, you now fear not advancing fast enough. The goalposts didn't just move, they multiplied, creating an endless series of finish lines that recede the moment you approach them. This is the exhausting middle ground where most people live. Not poor enough to justify their anxiety, not rich enough to silence it, just stuck in a perpetual state of almost, where achievement feels hollow and rest feels impossible. Psychologists call this the hedonic treadmill. It's the human tendency to return to a baseline level of happiness, no matter what happens, good or bad. You get the raise, you feel good for a week, maybe a month, and then you adapt. Your brain recalibrates. What once felt like luxury becomes normal. What once felt like security becomes just enough. And the gap between where you are and where you think you should be remains exactly the same, no matter how much you earn. There's a neurological reason for this. Your brain is wired to notice change, not states. It lights up when something new happens, but once that newness fades, your neurons stop firing with the same intensity. Our ancestors couldn't afford to feel satisfied for long because satisfaction meant complacency. So even when you've achieved what you once dreamed of, your brain refuses to let you rest. It keeps raising the stakes, keeps moving the target, keeps telling you that stopping now would be a mistake. You might think this is about ambition, about drive, but there's a difference between healthy ambition and compulsive striving. Healthy ambition says, I want to grow. Compulsive striving says, I'm not safe until I do. One comes from possibility, the other from fear. One expands you, the other exhausts you, but this isn't just about adaptation. It's deeper than that. Because for some people, no amount of money ever feels like safety. They could have millions in the bank and still lie awake at night. That's not rational. That's trauma. That's the nervous system remembering a time when scarcity was real, when loss was devastating, when money meant survival. Maybe it was watching a parent lose everything. Maybe it was the constant tension of living on the edge, never knowing if there would be enough. Whatever the origin, that memory lodged itself deep in your body. And now, years later, even when you're objectively secure, that old alarm keeps ringing. Your rational mind knows you're fine, but your nervous system hasn't gotten the memo. Because trauma doesn't live in your thoughts, it lives in your body. And once your brain learns that equation, once it wires itself to believe that financial security equals emotional safety, it becomes almost impossible to feel rich enough. It's not a number, it's a feeling, and that feeling lives in the past. Think about what you learned about money as a child. Not the explicit lessons, the lectures about saving or spending, but the quiet ones, the ones that seeped into your bones without words. The tension in your parents' voice when bills arrived, the silence at the dinner table when someone lost a job, the way love sometimes felt conditional on what could be provided. Maybe you grew up watching someone work themselves to exhaustion just to keep the lights on. Maybe you remember the shame of wearing hand-me-downs, of asking for things you couldn't have, of hearing, "We can't afford that," so many times it became your internal voice. Or maybe you grew up with enough, but watched money create distance between people, watched it become the language of control, of power, of worth. These weren't just observations. They were formative experiences that shaped your entire relationship with security, with value, with what it means to be safe in the world. And they didn't come with instruction manuals or warning labels, they just happened, quietly inscribing themselves into your nervous system. You might remember a specific moment, the day your parent came home, and you could see it in their face before they said a word. Something had gone wrong. Money was tight again. The precarious balance you'd been living on had tipped. You learned to read those faces, to sense the shift in energy, to become hypervigilant to the emotional weather of financial stress. Or maybe there was no single moment, just a constant undercurrent of anxiety. The way adults' conversations dropped to whispers when you entered the room. The way celebrations were small and practical, never extravagant, never frivolous. The unspoken rule that joy had to be earned, that comfort was a luxury, that wanting anything beyond the basics was somehow selfish. Children don't just observe these patterns, they internalize them. They build entire belief systems around them. And those beliefs don't disappear when you become an adult who earns your own money. You might have escaped the circumstances of your childhood. You might now earn more than your parents ever did, live in a nicer home, have financial options they never had. It shows up in unexpected ways. The guilt you feel when you spend money on yourself, the way you minimize your own needs and maximize everyone else's. The voice that says, "Who do you think you are?" when you consider something that feels too good, too expensive, too much. It shows up in how you save. Not joyfully, but compulsively, obsessively, as if every dollar is a sandbag against the flood that your body remembers, even if your mind doesn't. It shows up in how you celebrate success, or rather, how you don't. How achievement is immediately followed by, "Okay, what's next?" because stopping feels dangerous. These patterns hide in the background, shaping every financial decision you make. They tell you that rest is dangerous, that spending is weakness, that you must always be accumulating, preparing, protecting yourself from the collapse that feels inevitable. This is what psychologists call financial trauma. It's not about how much money you actually have, it's about how money feels in your nervous system. For someone with financial trauma, every purchase carries weight, every expense feels like risk, every moment of comfort feels temporary and unsafe. You might look successful on paper, you might have savings, investments, a stable income, but inside, you're still that child, watching the adults worry, still carrying the belief that security is an illusion, that money can disappear as quickly as it arrives. There's a specific kind of hypervigilance that comes with this. You're always calculating, always running numbers in your head, always preparing for the worst-case scenario. Your mind never rests because resting feels like the moment before disaster. You might check your bank account multiple times a day, not because you need to, but because not checking feels like losing control. You might have spreadsheets tracking every penny, not because you're organized, but because the alternative, not knowing exactly where you stand, triggers a panic you can barely explain. And so you keep chasing more, not because you're greedy, but because your nervous system has learned that more is the only protection against the fear of not enough. You're not trying to get rich. You're trying to finally feel safe. But here's the painful truth. Safety, the kind your nervous system is searching for, can't be bought. Because the fear isn't about your bank account. It's about the memory of vulnerability, the feeling of being small and powerless and dependent on forces beyond your control. Until you heal that part of yourself, until you separate the past from the present, no amount of wealth will ever feel like enough. The goal will keep moving, because the goal was never really financial. It was emotional, and emotions can't be solved with spreadsheets and investments. There's another layer to this, one that's harder to see. It's not just about your personal history, it's about the world we're living in. Because we exist in a culture that has weaponized comparison, that has turned everyone's life into a performance, that has made wealth visible in ways it never was before. You wake up, you open your phone, and within seconds, you're bombarded with evidence of other people's success. Someone's buying a house. Someone's traveling to places you've only dreamed of. Someone's wearing clothes that cost more than your rent. And even though you know, logically, that these are curated highlights, that no one posts their struggles, your nervous system doesn't know that. Your brain sees abundance everywhere, except in your own life. And it begins to recalibrate what enough means based on what everyone else appears to have. This isn't envy in the simple sense. It's a psychological phenomenon called social comparison theory. The theory was developed by psychologist Leon Festinger, who found that humans have an innate drive to evaluate themselves by comparing themselves to others. When objective measures aren't available, we look sideways to see how we're doing. But here's what's changed. In the past, your comparison group was limited to people you actually knew. Now, your comparison group is potentially everyone on Earth with an internet connection, and most of them are only showing you their highlights. You're comparing your behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel. You're measuring your messy middle against their polished endings, and your brain doesn't account for this distortion. It just registers that you're falling behind. We measure our worth, our success, our happiness, not in absolute terms, but relative to those around us. And in the age of social media, those around us includes millions of people whose lives we'll never truly understand. We see their wins without their losses, their luxury without their debt, their confidence without their fear. Think about how this plays out in real time. You're feeling good about your life, genuinely content. Then you scroll for 5 minutes, and suddenly you're questioning everything. Why don't you travel more? Why don't you have a nicer car? Why aren't you further along in your career? The contentment evaporates, replaced by a gnawing sense of inadequacy. Not because anything in your actual life changed, but because you were exposed to a version of success that made yours feel smaller. This happens dozens of times a day, each exposure chipping away at your sense of enough. This creates a distortion, because suddenly, having a comfortable life isn't enough if someone else has more. Stability isn't satisfying if someone your age is already wealthy. Progress feels meaningless when you're constantly confronted with people who seem miles ahead. And so you start chasing not what you actually need, but what you think you need to keep up. You start measuring your life against strangers, against algorithms, against an impossible standard that shifts every time you refresh your feed. You forget to ask what you actually want. What actually makes you feel alive? Because you're too busy trying to close the gap between where you are and where everyone else appears to be. But here's what's devastating. That gap is artificial. Most of the wealth you see online is debt disguised as success, insecurity dressed up as confidence, emptiness hidden behind expensive things. People are performing prosperity while drowning in anxiety, just like you. And yet, the comparison continues. Because your brain doesn't care about truth, it cares about survival. And in a world where status seems to equal safety, where visibility seems to equal value, your nervous system interprets wealth as protection. So you keep striving, keep accumulating, keep telling yourself that the next milestone will finally silence the voice that says you're not enough. But the voice isn't coming from your bank account. It's coming from a culture that profits from your dissatisfaction, that needs you to feel inadequate. So you'll keep consuming, keep working, keep chasing the illusion of arrival. Let me tell you what happens when you spend years feeling like you're never rich enough. Your relationship with money becomes a relationship with fear. Every dollar saved feels like a small victory against inevitable collapse. Every dollar spent feels like failure, like weakness, like proof that you don't have the discipline to protect yourself. You start to hoard. Not always in obvious ways, not always by refusing to spend, but emotionally, you hold on to things because letting go feels dangerous. You say no to experiences because saving feels safer than living. You measure your worth by your net worth, and on the days when the number doesn't grow, you feel like you're falling behind. The hoarding shows up in subtle ways. You have clothes in your closet with tags still on them because they were on sale and you might need them someday. You have pantries stocked like you're preparing for a siege. You have multiple backup plans for your backup plans, always preparing for the worst. You justify this as being responsible, practical, prepared. But underneath, there's a tremor of panic. The thought of having less, even slightly less, triggers something primal. Your chest tightens, your thoughts spiral, and suddenly you're catastrophizing about scenarios that have a tiny chance of happening. This is what psychologists call scarcity mindset. It's when your brain becomes so focused on what you lack that it can't see what you have. It's when fear becomes the lens through which you view every decision, every opportunity, every moment of potential joy. People with scarcity mindset aren't stingy or selfish. They're scared. They're operating from a place of survival, from a belief that the world is fundamentally unsafe and that money is the only shield they have. And so they sacrifice the present for a future that never feels secure enough to actually enjoy. Think about what this does to your daily life. You're at a restaurant with friends, and while everyone's laughing and enjoying themselves, you're calculating the bill in your head, feeling anxious about the cost, wondering if you should have just stayed home. You're present physically, but mentally you're somewhere else, in a future where this expense comes back to haunt you. Or you're offered an opportunity, a trip, a course, an investment in yourself. Your first thought isn't, would I enjoy this? Or, would this enrich my life? It's, can I afford this? Even when you objectively can. The question becomes a wall between you and life itself. You watch other people spend freely and wonder how they do it. You can't understand people who live for today because you're so busy preparing for tomorrow. But here's what's tragic. Scarcity mindset doesn't just prevent you from enjoying money, it prevents you from making it. Because when you're operating from fear, you make defensive choices, you avoid risk, you cling to what's familiar even when it's no longer serving you. You stay in jobs that underpay you because leaving feels too dangerous. You avoid investing because losing feels more painful than the possibility of gain. You live in a constant state of tension, always preparing for disaster, always bracing for loss, never allowing yourself to rest in the abundance that's already here. Researchers have found that scarcity mindset actually narrows your cognitive bandwidth. It's like your brain is running too many background programs, constantly calculating, worrying, planning, that it doesn't have the mental space left for creativity, for strategy, for the kind of expansive thinking that actually creates wealth. You become so focused on short-term preservation that you can't see long-term possibility. You choose safety over growth, protection over opportunity. And while that might feel responsible, it often keeps you stuck in the very position you're trying to escape. There's also a social cost. Scarcity mindset makes it hard to be generous, not because you don't want to be, but because every act of giving feels like depletion. To treat friends, to donate, to participate in the social exchanges that build community and connection. And the cruelest part? Even when you achieve financial security by any reasonable measure, your nervous system doesn't register it. Because scarcity mindset isn't about reality, it's about perception. It's a filter that turns plenty into not enough, stability into fragility, peace into anxiety. The numbers in your account could be objectively secure, but if your nervous system is still wired for scarcity, you'll never feel it. You'll always be calculating, always preparing, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And in the process, you'll miss your own life, because life doesn't happen in the future when you finally have enough. It happens now. In the moments you're too anxious to notice, in the experiences you're too afraid to invest in the joy you keep postponing until you feel financially safe enough to deserve it. There's a question that haunts people who feel like they're never rich enough. It's not always spoken out loud, but it's always there, humming beneath every financial decision, every moment of stress, every comparison to others. The question is this: what will happen if I don't have enough? It's not a practical question, it's an existential one. Because beneath the fear of not having enough money is a deeper fear, the fear of not being enough. The fear that if you lose your financial footing, you'll lose your worth, your identity, your place in the world. This is where the psychology gets profound. Because for many people, money is not just a tool, it's a symbol. It represents safety, yes, but also control, power, freedom, and most painfully, love. If you grew up in an environment where love was conditional, where affection was tied to achievement, where your value depended on what you could provide, then money becomes proof of worthiness. Think about the messages you absorbed growing up. Maybe it was explicit: we're investing in your education, don't let us down. Maybe it was subtle: the way affection increased when you succeeded, the way disappointment hung in the air when you didn't. Maybe it was silent: the way love felt like a transaction, something earned through performance rather than given freely. These experiences taught you that acceptance has a price, that love isn't unconditional, it's a reward for being valuable enough. And in a capitalist society, value is measured in dollars. So you learn to equate wealth with worthiness, success with lovability, achievement with deserving care. When you have it, you feel seen, respected, deserving of care. When you don't, you feel invisible, disposable, like you failed some fundamental test of being human. And so you chase wealth not for what it can buy, but for what it represents, the validation that you are, finally, enough. But validation earned through achievement is fragile. It requires constant maintenance, constant proof, constant performance. You can never rest because resting feels like regression, and regression feels like losing the love you worked so hard to earn. Psychologists call this conditional self-worth. It's when your sense of value is tied to external markers, achievements, status, possessions, rather than an internal sense of inherent worth. And it's exhausting because it means you're always one failure away from worthlessness. Research by psychologist Jennifer Crocker has shown that people with conditional self-worth experience higher levels of anxiety, depression, and stress. They're more likely to avoid challenges, to give up in the face of difficulty, to experience shame when they fall short, because for them, failure isn't just failure, it's proof of fundamental inadequacy. For people who tie their self-worth to wealth, every financial setback isn't just a practical problem, it's a crisis of identity. Not progressing feels like being left behind as a person, not just financially. And so the pressure never eases because the stakes are too high. You can see this in how people talk about financial success. They don't say, "I earned money." They say, "I made it," as if wealth is the marker of having arrived as a complete human being. And conversely, financial struggle is described as not making it, as if your entire existence is defined by your economic status. This is why some of the wealthiest people you'll ever meet still feel poor. Not because they lack resources, but because they lack a sense of enoughness that exists independent of those resources. They've built their entire identity on accumulation, and without it, they don't know who they are. Imagine building your entire sense of self on something as unstable as money, something that can be lost in a market crash, a bad investment, an economic recession. You're essentially building your psychological home on quicksand, and part of you knows it, which is why you can never fully relax. The anxiety isn't about the money itself, it's about what the money represents, your defense against being unloved, unwanted, unworthy. And that's why no amount is ever enough. Because the wound you're trying to heal isn't financial, it's emotional. But here's where something shifts. Because the moment you realize that no amount of money will ever feel like enough, something interesting happens. You stop chasing the number and start asking the real question. What am I actually afraid of? For some, the answer is homelessness, destitution, the literal loss of survival. It's the fear of being judged, of feeling inferior, of losing control, of returning to a time when they felt small and powerless and dependent on others. These fears are valid, They're rooted in real experiences, real pain. But they're also, in most cases, no longer reflective of present reality. You are not the child who had no agency. You are not the person who was once vulnerable to forces beyond your control. And yet, your nervous system doesn't know that. It's still operating from the old program, still scanning for threats that may no longer exist. And until you update that program, until you teach your body that you are safe now, wealth will always feel like preparation for disaster rather than permission to live. This is where healing begins. Not by making more money, but by separating financial security from emotional safety, by recognizing that the peace you're searching for won't be found in your bank account. It will be found in the relationship you build with yourself. It starts with awareness, with noticing when you're making decisions from fear versus from choice. When you say no to something you want, is it because you genuinely can't afford it? Or because spending triggers anxiety? When you check your account for the 5th time today, what are you actually looking for? These questions aren't meant to judge you, they're meant to illuminate the pattern. Because once you can see the pattern clearly, once you can distinguish between present reality and past programming, you create space for something new. You begin to see that your current fear isn't always rooted in present circumstances, but in memories that haven't been processed. You start to notice the stories you tell yourself. Or is that the belief system of someone who learned their value depended on constant productivity? These distinctions matter deeply and fundamentally for your healing. Because when you can separate then from now, when you recognize that your adult self has resources your child self didn't, you give yourself permission to respond differently. It means learning to feel worthy without achievement. This is perhaps the most difficult work because it goes against everything you've internalized. It means sitting with yourself on a day when you've accomplished nothing and still believing you deserve care, rest, kindness. It means practicing rest without guilt. Actually resting, not productive rest, not self-improvement disguised as relaxation, but genuine doing nothing rest. And noticing the discomfort that arises, the voice that says you should be doing more, earning more, preparing more. That voice is the old program running. And instead of obeying it, you learn to observe it with compassion. There's that old belief that rest equals danger. You acknowledge it without letting it run your life. It means allowing yourself to enjoy what you have instead of constantly fixating on what you lack. This requires conscious practice because your brain is wired to notice gaps, not abundance. So you have to deliberately redirect your attention. And most importantly, it means grieving the child who didn't feel safe, who learned that love was earned, who believed that value was conditional. This grief is necessary because you can't heal what you won't acknowledge. You have to go back to that child and say, I see you. I see how hard you tried. I see how scared you were. And I'm so sorry no one told you that you were enough just as you were. This isn't self-pity, it's self-compassion, and it's the foundation of real healing. Because that child is still inside you, still scared, still calculating, still trying to protect you the only way they knew how. But they don't need to do that anymore. You're not powerless. You're not dependent. You're not that small anymore. And when you finally speak to that part of yourself with compassion, when you tell them they can rest now, and for the first time, you begin to notice what's already here. There's a paradox at the heart of wealth that most people never see. The more enslaved you become to its pursuit, and the moment you stop equating it with your worth, it stops having power over your peace. This doesn't mean money doesn't matter. It does. Financial security is real, practical, necessary, but there's a difference between having enough to meet your needs and believing that more will finally make you feel complete. One is grounded in reality. The other is a story your mind tells itself to avoid deeper pain. Let's be clear about what enough actually means. Enough means your basic needs are met. Shelter, food, healthcare, safety. It means you're not in survival mode, not one emergency away from catastrophe. For many people, that's a real concern, and pursuing that level of security is entirely valid. But here's what happens. Most people who feel like they're never rich enough have already surpassed enough by any objective measure. They have stable housing, they eat regularly, they have access to healthcare. What they lack isn't resources, it's a felt sense of security. The truth is, most people who feel like they're never rich enough already have enough. They have shelter, food, stability, resources. What they don't have is permission to feel satisfied. What they don't have is the ability to say, "This is okay. I am okay. I can stop running now," because stopping feels dangerous. It feels like complacency, like settling, like giving up on dreams. But stopping isn't surrender. It's presence. It's the radical act of being here, fully, without waiting for the future to validate your existence. Think about what you're actually giving up in the pursuit of more. You're giving up today for a tomorrow that never feels like enough. You're giving up relationships for work that promises security but delivers stress. You're giving up experiences for savings that you're too afraid to use. And maybe that's the real transformation. Not becoming wealthy, but becoming present. Not accumulating more, but appreciating more. Not achieving financial independence, but emotional freedom. The freedom to separate your worth from your wealth, your peace from your portfolio. Because at the end of your life, you won't remember your bank balance. You'll remember the moments you were too anxious to enjoy, the experiences you postponed, the relationships you neglected, the beauty you overlooked because you were too busy calculating your way to a safety that was always just out of reach. There's a haunting quality to deferred living. You tell yourself you're being responsible, that you're building something, and maybe you are, but what good is building a fortress if you spend your entire life standing guard outside it, never actually living inside the safety you worked so hard to create? What if peace isn't something you earn, but something you choose, moment by moment, regardless of what's in your account? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're invitations to a different way of being. So if you're someone who's felt this, who's worked and saved and climbed, and still felt the gnawing sense that it's never enough, I want you to know something. You're not greedy. You're not failing. You're just carrying a wound that money was never designed to heal. And the first step toward healing isn't making more. Feeling the child inside you who learned that love was earned through achievement and is still trying, even now, to prove their worth. You don't need to prove anything. You never did. Your worth was never conditional. It was never tied to what you could provide, what you could accumulate, what you could display to the world. It was always just yours, quietly, inherently, unshakably. And when you finally let that truth land, when you let it sink past your mind and into your body, something releases. The chase slows. The comparison fades. And for the first time in a long time, you can breathe. You can see that the life you've been waiting to live is already here. Not in the future, when you finally have enough, but now, in this moment, with everything you already are. And maybe that's the real wealth. Not what you have, but who you're learning to be without it. Who are you when no one's watching your success? Who are you when your worth isn't measured by your net worth? Who are you in the quiet moments when there's nothing to prove and no one to impress? That's the self that's been waiting for you all along. Finding that self requires you to stop running, to stop checking the accounts obsessively, stop comparing yourself to others, stop postponing joy until you reach some arbitrary milestone. It requires you to sit still in your own life and ask, what if this is it? What if this is already enough? The number in your account will never be enough to silence the voice that says you're not enough, but your presence, your compassion, your willingness to stop running and simply be here, that's the abundance you've been searching for all along. And maybe that's the hardest lesson of all, that the peace you're seeking through accumulation is actually found in acceptance. Acceptance of where you are, who you are, what you have right now. Not resignation, not giving up, but a deep exhale into the reality that you've been enough this entire time. You've been enough on the days you earn nothing. You've been enough in the moments of failure. Because your worth was never determined by those numbers. It just felt like it was because that's what you were taught. But you can unlearn that. You can separate who you are from what you have. You can build a life where money is a tool, not a master. Where wealth supports your existence rather than defines it. Where peace comes from presence, not portfolios. So maybe the real question isn't, when will I have enough? Maybe the real question is, when will I let myself be enough? And the answer to that question has nothing to do with money and everything to do with love. The love you give yourself, the love you allow yourself to receive, the love that says, You don't need to keep proving yourself. You can rest now. Just maybe. Not in the accumulation of more, but in the recognition of enough. Not in the future you're chasing, but in the present you've been overlooking. Not in what you'll become when you finally have it all, but in who you already are beneath all the striving. You are enough. You have always been enough. And the moment you believe that, truly believe it, is the moment you become free.